You're a racist. You're an Islamophobe. You're everything America's got wrong. The studio lights seemed to dim as Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's words sliced through the air like shrapnel. The CNN studio audience erupted with mixed applause and gasps. Some people stood, cheering. Others sat in stunned silence. The host, veteran journalist Anderson Hayes, looked ready to step in, but couldn't find a chance. Dan Bongino sat perfectly still across the debate table, his expression unchanged. His hands stayed folded on top of a thick leather portfolio. His posture, the military bearing from years of Secret Service training, hadn't budged an inch during Omar's 10-minute tirade. His eyes, though, told a different story. They were cold, focused with the intensity of a federal agent who'd just found the evidence he needed. "Congresswoman," he said quietly, his voice carrying that controlled authority forged from years of protecting presidents and investigating federal crimes. "Thank you for that assessment." He paused, letting the moment settle. "Now, let me show America who you really are." The audience fell silent. Even Omar's loudest supporters seemed to sense something had shifted. Bongino reached for his portfolio, opening it with deliberate precision. "You've spent 30 minutes calling me a racist, an Islamophobe, a hate-monger. You've questioned my patriotism, my character, my service to this country." His voice stayed even, almost conversational. "I've been called worse by better people." He pulled out the first document, holding it up for the cameras. "But since you've made this personal, let's talk about your record, because America deserves to know who you really are. And unlike you, Congresswoman," he tapped the stack of papers, "I brought documentation." Omar's expression flickered from triumphant to wary in an instant. Anderson Hayes finally found his voice. "Gentlemen, lady, I think we should know," Bongino said firmly, his gaze never leaving Omar. "The Congresswoman started this conversation. She gets to finish it." The CNN special event had been built as a serious discussion of immigration, Islam, and American identity in 2021. The network had presented it as a chance for civil dialogue on topics dividing the nation, hoping two people with very different views could find common ground, or at least mutual understanding. Dan Bongino had arrived early, as was his habit from his law enforcement days. At 50 years old, he still moved with the disciplined efficiency of someone who'd spent decades in public service. First as an NYPD officer patrolling Brooklyn's diverse neighborhoods, then as a Secret Service agent guarding presidents from both parties. 3 unsuccessful congressional campaigns, a battle with cancer that he'd won, and now one of America's most influential conservative voices with a chart-topping podcast. He'd dressed carefully for the occasion: dark suit, crisp white shirt, understated tie. This wasn't his podcast studio where he could be informal. This was CNN, enemy territory by any conservative measure, and he understood the importance of presentation. Ilhan Omar had arrived exactly on time, surrounded by an entourage of staffers and advisors. At 42 years old, she'd already become one of the most recognizable faces in Congress, a member of the Squad, that group of progressive freshmen who'd stormed Washington. Her story was remarkable by any standard. Born in Somalia, raised in a refugee camp in Kenya, immigrated to America at 13, and elected to Congress at 36. She was among the first Muslim women elected to Congress, wearing her hijab as a symbol of both her faith and representation. Tonight she wore it in a vibrant purple, matching her bold jacket. Her team had clearly prepared her for a fight, not a conversation. The pre-show pleasantries were brief and cold. A quick handshake, few nods, They took their spots at opposite ends of the curved debate table with Anderson Hayes between them. "Good evening," Hayes began, his voice carrying the gravitas that made him one of cable news's most trusted anchors. "Welcome to CNN's America in Dialogue special. I'm Anderson Hayes. Tonight, we're tackling topics that have dominated our national conversation: immigration policy, religious identity, and what it means to be American in an increasingly diverse nation." He gestured to his left. "Joining me is Dan Bongino, former Secret Service agent, former NYPD officer, best-selling author, and host of The Dan Bongino Show, one of the most listened-to political podcasts in America." Bongino nodded to the camera and audience. "And to my right, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, representing Minnesota's 5th District, a member of the House Budget Committee and the Committee on Education and the Workforce, and a leading progressive voice on issues of immigration, social justice, and foreign policy." Omar smiled broadly, waving to the audience with practiced ease. Hayes outlined the format: 90 minutes, no commercial breaks, open discussion, equal time, fact-based arguments. The audience would remain silent until the final Q&A segment. "Mr. Bongino, let's begin with you," Hayes said. "You've been outspoken about immigration reform. What's your vision for a system that balances security with America's identity as a nation of immigrants?" Bongino leaned forward, gathering his thoughts. "Thank you, Anderson. Look, this isn't complicated. I'm the grandson of immigrants. My family came here legally, waited their turn, learned the language, and became Americans. Not Italian Americans or hyphenated Americans, but Americans who happen to be of Italian descent. That's the difference." He spoke clearly, methodically. "We need a system that's merit-based, that prioritizes the skills our economy needs, that ensures we know who's coming into our country. We need to finish the border security infrastructure. We need to end chain migration. And we need to stop pretending that wanting secure borders makes you a racist. It makes you rational." Hayes turned to Omar. "Congresswoman, your response." That's when everything shifted. Omar didn't address his points. She didn't engage with his policy stances. Instead, she attacked him personally, her voice rising with each sentence. "Anderson, I find it rich, absolutely rich, that Dan Bongino wants to lecture anyone about immigration or what it means to be American. This is a man who has spent years on Fox News, on his podcast, spreading fear about Muslims, about refugees, about immigrants. This is Trump's attack dog, someone who built his entire media career on division and hate." Bongino's expression stayed neutral, but he started taking notes. He talks about his grandparents. "Well, I was a refugee. I lived in a refugee camp. I came here with nothing. And I've watched people like him demonize people like me for years. He questions our loyalty. He questions our values. He questions whether we even belong here." Her voice grew louder. "So before we have any policy discussion, let's be clear about what this is. This is about a man who has made millions of dollars spreading Islamophobia, who has questioned the patriotism of Muslim Americans, who has aligned himself with the most xenophobic elements of American politics." She pointed at Bongino. "You hate Muslims. You hate refugees. You hate people who look like me, and you've gotten rich doing it." The audience stirred uncomfortably. Hayes tried to step in. "Congresswoman, those are serious accusations." "I'm not finished." Omar was gaining momentum now, fueled by her own words. "Dan Bongino is a failed politician. He ran for Congress 3 times, and lost every single race. The American people rejected him because They saw through his message of hate. So he went on Fox News. He started a podcast, and he's been spreading that same hate ever since. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. You want to talk about immigration? Let's talk about how you have contributed to a climate of hate that has led to violence against Muslims, against mosques, against people who worship like I do. Let's talk about how your words have made people like me targets. Bongino continued taking notes, his face showing no emotion. You're a racist, Mr. Bongino. You're an Islamophobe. You're a bigot. And you represent everything that's wrong with America. You're not a patriot. You're a hate-monger who wrapped himself in the flag and pretended to serve while actually dividing us. The audience erupted, half in applause, half in shocked silence. Anderson Hayes looked pale. Mr. Bongino, those are very serious accusations. Bongino looked up from his notes. His expression was eerily calm, almost peaceful. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, yet carried perfectly across the studio. I'll let the Congresswoman finish her thoughts, he said simply. She clearly has more to say. Omar did. For another 5 minutes, she listed his alleged sins, his work for the Trump administration, which he'd never done, though facts didn't seem to matter, his criticism of Muslim politicians, which she called attacks on Islam itself, his opposition to refugee resettlement programs, which she labeled racism, and his general existence as a conservative commentator, which she deemed hateful. Finally, she delivered what she clearly thought was the knockout blow. You're nothing but a failed politician, a washed-up Secret Service agent who got rejected by the American people 3 times. You have no business questioning anyone in Congress, least of all a refugee who has lived the immigrant experience you only pretend to understand. You're an embarrassment to law enforcement. You're an embarrassment to public service. And, frankly, you should be ashamed of yourself. She sat back, arms crossed, looking triumphant. Her supporters in the audience applauded enthusiastically. The silence that followed was deafening. Dan Bongino set down his pen. He looked at his notes, then at the documents in his portfolio, then directly at Ilhan Omar. Congresswoman Omar, he said quietly, I've been waiting a long time for someone to give me this opportunity. He opened his portfolio. Since you've opened this door, let's walk through it together. Let's talk about your record of public service, because America deserves to know who you really are. He pulled out the first stack of documents, and unlike you, I brought receipts. Let's start with your husband, Congresswoman. Bongino's voice stayed conversational, almost friendly. Tim Minette, nice guy, I'm sure. He runs a political consulting firm called E Street Group. He held up a Federal Election Commission filing, the pages clearly visible to the cameras. Do you know how much your campaign has paid his company? Omar's confident expression faltered slightly. This is a personal attack. It's a Federal Election Commission question. Congresswoman, how much has your campaign paid your husband's firm? My campaign follows all federal laws. That's not what I asked. Bongino's tone stayed polite, but firm. How much money has your campaign paid the E Street Group? Omar's jaw tightened. I don't have the exact figures. I do. Bongino pulled out more documents. From August 2018 through November 2020, your campaign paid the E Street Group, the company co-owned by Tim Minette, nearly $3 million. The audience gasped. $3 million? Congresswoman? Let me show you the breakdown. He began laying out FEC filings on the table one by one. Fundraising consulting, $800,000. Digital communications, $500,000. Internet advertising, $600,000. Video production, $400,000. Travel expenses. He paused meaningfully. $300,000. Travel expenses started in April 2019. Do you remember what else happened in April 2019? Omar said nothing, her expression rigid. Let me refresh your memory. Bongino pulled out another document. On April 7, 2019, Tim Minot told his wife, his then-wife, Dr. Beth Minot, that he was romantically involved with and in love with you. That's from her divorce filing, which is public record. He held up the divorce document. She filed for divorce, citing your affair with her husband. And you know what's interesting? Your campaign started paying E Street Group for travel expenses in April 2019, the same month the affair started. The same month Tim Minot left his wife for you. Anderson Hayes looked like he wanted to interrupt, but couldn't find the words. Bongino continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. In fact, let me read you something from Beth Minot's divorce filing. She stated that her husband's recent travel and long work hours now appear to be more related to his affair with Omar than with his actual work commitments. He set the document down and pulled out another. The National Legal and Policy Center filed a complaint with the FEC alleging that your campaign used donor funds to facilitate your personal relationship with Tim Minot. They alleged that you converted campaign funds to personal use, specifically funding travel, so you could be with your boyfriend. That complaint was dismissed, Omar started, on a technicality. Bongino interrupted. The FEC dismissed it because they couldn't definitively prove the travel was personal versus campaign-related, but they never said it was ethical. They never said it was appropriate. They just couldn't meet the legal burden of proof. He leaned forward. But here's what we do know, Congresswoman. We know that E Street Group was your campaign's largest vendor during the 2020 election cycle. We know they received nearly $3 million. We know that represented about 50% of your total campaign expenditures. Half of all the money your donors gave you went to your boyfriend's company. Omar tried to respond. We terminated that contract in 2020. Yes, after the scandal became public, after the FEC complaint, after watchdog groups started asking questions, after you married him. You only stopped when you got caught. Bongino pulled out yet another document. And here's the beautiful part. Well, beautiful if you like irony. In 2022, after you cut ties with E Street Group, your campaign paid other consulting firms about $1 million for the exact same services. The same services that E Street charged you $3 million for. He looked directly at the camera. Same work, same services, but suddenly it cost 60% less when you weren't paying your boyfriend. So either you were massively overpaying him or you're massively underpaying everyone else. Which is it, Congresswoman? Omar's face had gone rigid. This is Islamophobia, disguised as ethics concerns. No, Bongino's voice was sharp for the first time. This is documented campaign finance violations disguised as consulting fees. These are FEC filings, Congresswoman, public records. Anyone can look them up. He pulled out more documents. In fact, let's talk about the total picture. According to FEC records and investigative reporting, E Street Group and Minot's other companies earned approximately $4.5 million from federal campaigns. Want to guess what percentage came from your campaign? Silence. 65.9%. Nearly two-thirds of his business came from you. Your campaign was essentially funding his entire company. Bongino gathered the documents into a neat pile. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Your husband and his business partner, Will Haler, are now facing lawsuits for fraud. They allegedly promised an investor he'd triple his money on a winery investment, $900,000 return on $300,000. They only paid back the initial $300,000. They're being sued for $780,000. He pulled out news clippings. They also allegedly owe South Dakota marijuana entrepreneurs $1.2 million in another failed deal. And get this, the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control froze some of their funds. That's the office that deals with international embargoes and terrorist financing. Omar's voice was tight. I have no involvement in his business ventures. But you gave him $3 million in campaign money, Congresswoman. Campaign money that funded his company. Campaign money that he then used allegedly to defraud investors. The money trail leads right back to your donors. Bongino leaned back. So when you call me corrupt, when you question my ethics, I want Americans to remember this. You paid your boyfriend $3 million in campaign funds. You started paying him travel expenses the same month your affair began. When you got caught, you cut him off. And suddenly those same services cost 60% less. And now he's being sued for fraud. He looked directly at her. But I'm the one with ethics problems? Really? The audience was dead silent. Even Omar's supporters seemed stunned. Bongino didn't pause. He pulled out a new set of documents. Speaking of things you don't care about, let's talk about September 11th, 2001. Omar's expression shifted to alarm. You remember 9/11, right, Congresswoman? Or was that just some people did something? The audience erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. Anderson Hayes looked like he wanted to dive under the desk. March 2019. Bongino continued, his voice harder now, emotion creeping in despite his control. Council on American Islamic Relations fundraiser in Los Angeles. You gave a speech. Let me read your exact words. He pulled out a transcript. CAIR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. He looked up, his eyes blazing. Some people did something, Congresswoman. His voice rose for the first time. Let me tell you what some people did. 19. Al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airplanes. They flew 2 of them into the World Trade Center towers. They flew 1 into the Pentagon. They tried to fly the 4th into either the White House or the Capitol, but we don't know which, because the passengers fought back and crashed it into a field in Pennsylvania. He was standing now, his control slipping just enough to show the raw emotion underneath. Those some people murdered 2,977 innocent Americans, office workers, passengers, flight attendants, firefighters who ran into those burning towers, police officers who died trying to save people, Port Authority officers, paramedics, people just going to work on a Tuesday morning. His voice cracked slightly. I was NYPD, Congresswoman. I knew people who died that day. I knew cops who ran into those towers and never came out. I knew federal agents who spent years hunting down everyone connected to that attack. And you dismissed the worst terrorist attack in American history as some people did something. Omar tried to speak. That was taken out of context. Context! Bongino's voice was withering. Let me give you context. Nicholas Harros Jr., whose mother, Frances, died in the North Tower on September 11, 2019, the 18th anniversary of the attacks, wore a shirt to the memorial ceremony. You know what it said? He held up a photo. It had your quote on it. Some people did something. And he stood in front of the memorial and said, and I'm quoting here, today I am here to respond to you exactly who did what to whom. Madam, objectively speaking, we know who and what was done. There is no uncertainty about that. Why your confusion? Bongino's hands were shaking slightly as he held the photo. The New York Post ran a front-page headline. It showed the towers burning, and your quote, Rep. Ilhan Omar, 9/11 was some people did something. The sub-headline said, here's your something, 2,900 plus people dead by terrorism. He set the photo down carefully. You know what makes this even worse? You said this at a CARE event. CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, an organization that has had multiple members convicted of terrorism-related charges, an organization that was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation case, the largest terrorism financing trial in American history. Omar's voice was defensive. CAIR is a civil rights organization. CAIR had at least 3 of its national leaders convicted or deported for terrorist activities, Bongino shot back. But you spoke at their event and minimized 9/11. You didn't say terrorists. You didn't say Al-Qaeda. You said some people did something. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I wore that NYPD uniform, Congresswoman. I worked those streets. And when those towers came down, when my brothers and sisters in uniform ran toward the danger, they didn't think about religion. They didn't care if the people in those buildings were Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, or atheist. They just knew that terrorists had attacked America, and Americans needed help. His voice grew stronger. 343 firefighters died that day, 72 law enforcement officers, 55 military personnel, 2,606 civilians. And you called it some people did something. He pulled out another document. You later tweeted on September 11, 2019, that 9/11 was an attack on all of us and that you'd never forget. But you didn't apologize for your words. You didn't apologize to the families. You just tried to cover it up with a tweet. Bongino's voice was raw now. My brothers and sisters didn't die, so you could minimize their sacrifice as some people did something. They died fighting evil, real evil. The kind of evil that flies planes into buildings full of innocent people. He sat down slowly, his emotion barely contained. So when you call me a hate-monger, when you question my patriotism, I want Americans to remember that you couldn't even bring yourself to properly describe the 9/11 attacks. You couldn't honor the victims. You couldn't condemn the terrorists by name. You just said some people did something. The audience was completely silent. Several people had tears running down their faces. Bongino took a breath, regaining his composure. He pulled out a new set of documents, his hands steady again. Let's talk about another group you seem to have problems with, Congresswoman. Jewish Americans. Omar's eyes widened. February 2019. You were on Twitter responding to journalist Glenn Greenwald about IPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. He wrote about House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy threatening to punish you and Representative Rashida Tlaib for criticizing Israel. Bongino held up a printout of the tweet. You responded, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby." He looked at the camera. For those who don't know, Benjamins refers to $100 bills, which feature Benjamin Franklin. Someone asked you who you thought was paying American politicians. Your response? IPAC. He set the tweet down. Congresswoman, do you know what you did? You invoked one of the oldest, most disgusting anti-Semitic tropes in existence. That Jews use money to control politics. That Jewish wealth buys influence. That politicians are bought and paid for by Jewish money. Omar opened her mouth to protest, but Bongino held up his hand. I know what you're going to say. I was talking about lobbying. But you didn't say all lobbying is problematic. You specifically called out IPAC. You specifically invoked Benjamin's money. You specifically targeted the Jewish lobby. He pulled out more documents. The response was immediate and bipartisan. House Democratic leadership, your own party, released a statement saying you were engaging in deeply offensive anti-Semitic tropes. The Jewish Democratic Council of America denounced you. The Anti-Defamation League accused you of promoting an ugly conspiracy theory about Jewish influence in politics. Bongino leaned forward. You apologized. You said you were grateful for Jewish allies and colleagues who are educating me on the painful history of anti-Semitic tropes. Great. Apology is accepted. He paused. Except it happened again, less than a month later. He pulled out another transcript. March 2019. You spoke at a political event and said, and I quote, "I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it is okay for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country." His voice hardened. Allegiance to a foreign country. You were talking about American Jews supporting Israel. Do you know what that's called, Congresswoman? It's called the dual loyalty trope, the idea that Jews are more loyal to Israel than to their own countries. It's been used to persecute Jews for centuries. It was used in Nazi Germany. It was used in the Soviet Union. It's been used to justify violence, discrimination, and genocide. Omar tried to speak to, "I was talking about policy. You were talking about loyalty," Bongino interrupted. You suggested that American citizens who support Israel are pushing for allegiance to a foreign country. That's not policy criticism. That's questioning the patriotism of American Jews. He pulled out yet another document. The response was even stronger this time. 12 House Democrats, your colleagues, publicly denounced your statement. The House passed a resolution 407-23 condemning anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, and other forms of bigotry. The resolution was specifically written in response to your comments. Bongino held up the resolution. 407-23, Congresswoman. Your own Democratic colleagues condemned you. Even progressives, even members of the Squad had to go on record against anti-Semitism because of your words. He wasn't finished. But wait, there's more. June 2021. You tweeted that we have seen unthinkable atrocities committed by the U.S., Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, and the Taliban. His voice was incredulous. You compared the United States and Israel, two democracies with functioning legal systems, to Hamas and the Taliban. You put America and Israel in the same category as terrorist organizations that stone women, throw gay people off buildings, and use children as human shields. He pulled out more responses. 12 House Democrats immediately issued a statement condemning your remarks. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Steny Hoyer, Democratic leadership demanded you clarify. You were forced to issue a statement saying you weren't comparing democracies to terrorist organizations, but the damage was done. Bongino gathered all the anti-Semitism documents into one pile. And here's where it all came home, Congresswoman. February 2nd, 2023, the House of Representatives voted 218 to 211 to remove you from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He held up the vote tally. You were stripped of your committee assignment because of your anti-Semitic statements. The resolution specifically cited your pattern of conduct and comments that have been consistently anti-Semitic. You became the first member of Congress in modern history to be removed from a committee specifically for anti-Semitic remarks. He looked directly at her. So, let me get this straight, Congresswoman. You called me a racist. You called me a bigot. But your own party condemned you for anti-Semitism. Your own colleagues stripped you of your committee assignment. The House of Representatives officially rebuked you for bigoted statements. He spread his hands. And you have the audacity to call me a hate-monger? The audience was stunned into silence. Omar's supporters looked uncomfortable. Even some progressives were shifting in their seats. Omar's voice was tight. This is about silencing criticism of Israel. No, Bongino said firmly. This is about you using anti-Semitic tropes. You can criticize Israeli policy without invoking Jewish money. You can debate foreign aid without suggesting dual loyalty. You can discuss Middle East politics without comparing Israel to Hamas. He leaned back. But you chose to use those tropes. You chose those words. And when you got called out by Republicans and Democrats, you played the victim. You claimed you were being silenced. You claimed it was Islamophobia. His voice was harsh. No, Congresswoman, it was anti-Semitism. Your own party said so. Bongino pulled out a new document, and his expression suggested this was going to be particularly devastating. Now, let's talk about your loyalty, Congresswoman. Your recent speech to Somali Americans in Minneapolis. Omar's face went pale. January 2024, you spoke at an event about Somaliland, the breakaway region of Somalia. You spoke in Somali, which is fine, but what you said... He pulled out multiple translations. There was initially a translation that spread widely. It said you told the audience, I am Somali first, Muslim second, and that you would protect Somalia's interests from inside the U.S. system. That translation sparked calls for your censure, even your expulsion from Congress. Omar jumped in. That translation was false. It was debunked. I know, Bongino said calmly. And I'm not going to cite the false translation. I'm going to cite what you actually said based on verified translations from the Minnesota Star-Tribune and other sources. He read from the verified translation. You said, the U.S. government will do what we tell the U.S. government to do. You told your Somali audience, we as Somalis should have that confidence in ourselves. We live in this country. We pay taxes in this country. It's a country where one of your own sits in Congress. He looked up. You also said, the woman you sent to Congress is aware of you and has the same interest as you. He set the translation down. So even in the accurate translation, Congresswoman, you told a Somali audience that the U.S. government will do what we, meaning Somalis, tell it to do. You told them that you share their interests. You framed your congressional role as representing Somali interests. His voice hardened. Congresswoman, you're a member of the United States Congress. You took an oath to the Constitution. You represent Minnesota's 5th District, not Somalia, not Somaliland. But you stood before a Somali audience and told them you'd make the U.S. government serve their interests. He pulled out a copy of the oath of office. Let me read this to you. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. He emphasized the key words. True faith and allegiance to the Constitution, Congresswoman, to America, not to any foreign country, not to any ethnic group's foreign interests, to the United States of America. Bongino's voice rose. But you told Somalis that you'd make the U.S. government do what they want, that you share their interests, interests in a foreign territorial dispute, that you're in Congress as one of their own. He leaned forward. And here's the beautiful irony, Congresswoman. You've spent years accusing American Jews of dual loyalty. You suggested that supporting Israel means pushing for allegiance to a foreign country. But you openly tell a Somali audience that you'll prioritize their foreign interests from within Congress. His voice was harsh. You accused me of being unpatriotic. You questioned my loyalty, but you explicitly told foreigners you'd use your congressional position to advance their interests. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. Omar tried to defend herself. I was encouraging civic engagement. You were promising to make the U.S. government serve Somali interests, Bongino shot back. There's a difference between encouraging Americans of Somali descent to participate in democracy and promising to use your congressional position to advance Somalia's interests in a territorial dispute. He pulled out the censure resolution that had been introduced. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene introduced a resolution to censure you based on that speech. It failed along party lines because of the translation controversy, but the underlying issue remains. You've consistently prioritized foreign interests and identity politics over American unity. Bongino gathered those documents. So when you call me unpatriotic, when you question my service, I want Americans to remember this. I protected President Obama, a man I disagreed with politically, because that was my duty to America. I would have taken a bullet for him without hesitation, because I took an oath to the Constitution, not to any political party or ideology. His voice was firm. But you can't even get through a speech to Somali Americans without framing your role as serving their interests rather than American interests. Bongino leaned back in his chair, his expression almost amused now. You've called me racist 7 times tonight, Congresswoman. Let's talk about how you use that accusation as a shield against any and all criticism. He pulled out a timeline he'd prepared. This is a pattern with you. Anytime someone criticizes your policies, you cry racism. Anytime someone questions your statements, you cry Islamophobia. Anytime someone examines your record, you cry bigotry. He began reading from the timeline. FEC complaint about paying millions to your boyfriend's company? Your response, this is targeting a Muslim woman. Criticism of your "some people did something" comment? Your response? Islamophobic backlash. Condemnation for anti-Semitic statements? Your response? Silencing advocacy for Palestinians. Removal from Foreign Affairs Committee? Your response? I'm being targeted because I'm African, Muslim, and a woman. He looked up. Do you see the pattern, Congresswoman? You have an answer for everything. And that answer is always, you're attacking me because of my identity. Bongino's voice grew passionate. I don't care that you're Muslim. I don't care that you're Somali. I don't care that you're a refugee. I don't care that you wear a hijab. I care about your record. I care about your statements. I care about your actions as a member of Congress. He stood up, his intensity building. You paid $3 million in campaign funds to your boyfriend's company. That's not Islamophobia. That's corruption. You said 9/11 was "some people did something." That's not racism. That's dishonoring victims. You made anti-Semitic statements that your own party condemned. That's not bigotry against Muslims. That's bigotry against Jews. You told Somalis you'd serve their interests from Congress. That's not xenophobia. That's a legitimate question about priorities. His voice rose. But you can't defend those actions. So you make it about identity. You hide behind your religion and your refugee status. And anyone who questions you, anyone who holds you accountable, gets called a bigot. He pulled out examples. Do you know what this does, Congresswoman? It trivializes real discrimination. It makes people skeptical when someone actually faces bigotry. It's the boy who cried wolf, except instead of a wolf, it's racism. Bongino's voice was harsh. Now, I protected Barack Obama, a black man, for years. I would have died for him without hesitation because that was my job. I worked in Brooklyn in diverse neighborhoods, treating every person with respect, regardless of race or religion. I investigated crimes based on evidence, not ethnicity. He pointed at her. But you You call everyone who disagrees with you a racist. You've done it to Republicans. You've done it to Democrats who condemned your anti-Semitism. You've done it to journalists who asked tough questions. And you're doing it to me right now. His voice dropped. It's lazy, Congresswoman. It's dishonest. And it's insulting to people who actually face discrimination. Bongino sat back down, pulling out a new set of documents. His voice was calmer now, but no less forceful. Before you came to Congress, you had problems in Minnesota. Let's talk about those. He held up a finding from the Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board. June 2019, Minnesota Campaign Finance Board found that you violated state campaign finance laws, multiple violations. He began reading. You used campaign funds for personal travel to Boston and Washington, D.C. You used campaign funds to pay for travel to Estonia. And you still haven't explained what you were doing there. You filed joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi in 2014 and 2015. He looked up. That last one is interesting, Congresswoman, because you filed joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi, your current husband, in 2014 and 2015, but you weren't married to him then. You were legally married to Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi from 2009 to 2017. His voice was incredulous. You filed joint tax returns with a man you weren't married to while you were legally married to someone else. That's not a mistake, Congresswoman. That's tax fraud. Omar tried to speak. Those matters were resolved. Yes, you paid a $500 penalty and reimbursed your campaign $3,469 for improper use of campaign funds, but you committed the violations, Congresswoman. You used campaign money for personal travel. You filed false tax returns. Bongino pulled out the full report. The board found that you used campaign funds to pay for personal travel to Boston and Washington, D.C., and to pay for her and Hirsi's joint filing of federal tax returns for the years 2014 and 2015. Those are violations of Minnesota law. He looked at the camera. And this was before the Tim Minette scandal. This was before the $3 million in payments to your boyfriend's company. This was before Congress. You already had a pattern of misusing campaign funds and violating ethics rules. He pulled out recent news articles. And it continues. Your husband, Tim Minette, his companies are now being sued for fraud. The Minnesota Reformer reported that he and his business partner allegedly defrauded a winery investor of $600,000 and owe South Dakota marijuana entrepreneurs $1.2 million. Bongino held up the articles. Where did Minette get the money for these business ventures? According to the report, from the $3 million your campaign paid his company. Campaign money from your donors is now allegedly tied to fraud schemes. His voice was harsh. So we have Minnesota campaign finance violations, tax fraud filing joint returns while married to someone else, $3 million to your boyfriend's company, FEC complaints, and now your husband's companies are being sued for fraud using money that traces back to your campaign. He gathered all the documents. That's not one mistake, Congresswoman. That's a pattern, a decade-long pattern of financial misconduct, ethics violations, and questionable dealings. He looked directly at her. But I'm the one with ethics problems? I'm the corrupt one. Really? Dan Bongino stood up, gathering all his documents into organized piles on the table. The studio was completely silent. Even Anderson Hayes seemed to have given up on moderating, his face pale and stunned. Let me summarize for the American people, Bongino said, his voice carrying the authority of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. Because this is important. He gestured to the first pile of documents. Campaign finance corruption. Congresswoman Omar paid her boyfriend's company $3 million during their affair. Payments for travel expenses started the exact month the affair began, according to his ex-wife's divorce filing. After public scrutiny forced her to cut ties with his firm, the same services suddenly cost 60% less from other vendors. His companies earned $4.5 million, with 66% coming from her campaign. Those companies are now being sued for fraud. Second pile, anti-Semitism. She invoked the Jewish money trope, suggesting IPAC buys politicians. She suggested American Jews have dual loyalty to Israel. She compared the United States and Israel to Hamas and the Taliban. Her own Democratic colleagues condemned her statements twice. The House voted 407 to 23 on a resolution specifically addressing her anti-Semitic comments. She was removed from the House Foreign Affairs Committee by a vote of 218 to 211 specifically because of her pattern of anti-Semitic remarks. Third pile, disrespect to 9/11 victims. She described the worst terrorist attack in American history as, "Some people did something." She gave this speech at a KRMP, an organization with documented ties to terrorism. She never adequately apologized to victims' families. Nicholas Harros Jr., whose mother died in the towers, wore a shirt with her quote to the 9/11 memorial and publicly called her out. Fourth pile, questionable loyalty. She told a Somali audience that the U.S. government would do what we, meaning Somalis, tell it to do. She said she shares their interests and represents them in Congress. She prioritized Somali foreign policy interests over American unity. She did this while simultaneously accusing American Jews of dual loyalty. Fifth pile, ethics violations. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board found she violated state law by using campaign funds for personal travel and filing joint tax returns with someone she wasn't married to while being married to someone else. She paid a $500 penalty and reimbursed her campaign $3,169. This was before her congressional career and the Minette scandal. Sixth pile, the racism shield. She responds to every criticism with accusations of racism, Islamophobia, or bigotry. FEC complaints? Targeting a Muslim woman. 9/11 criticism, Islamophobic backlash. Anti-Semitism condemnation, silencing Palestinian advocacy. Foreign affairs removal, targeting me for my identity. She cannot defend her record on substance, so she makes it about identity. Bongino walked around the table, his voice building. Congresswoman Omar came here tonight and called me a racist, an Islamophobe, a hate-monger, a bigot, everything wrong with America. She spent 30 minutes attacking my character without citing a single fact. He gestured to all the documents on the table. I responded with Federal Election Commission filings, House voting records, Minnesota state findings, court documents, news reports, public statements. Every single thing I've said tonight can be verified. Every document is real. Every quote is accurate. He looked directly at Omar. You called me a racist, but I'm citing your public record. I'm not attacking your religion. I'm questioning your $3 million to your boyfriend. I'm not attacking your ethnicity. I'm questioning your "some people did something" statement. I'm not attacking your refugee status. I'm questioning why you told Somalis you'd serve their interests from Congress. His voice rose. You can't defend your record, so you hide behind identity. You call everyone who questions you a bigot. You play the victim when caught in wrongdoing, and you've gotten away with it for years because people are afraid of being called racist. He pointed at her. Well, I'm not afraid, Congresswoman. I've been called worse by better people. I'm a former cop, former Secret Service agent, cancer survivor, and yes, three-time failed congressional candidate. But I never paid my family millions in campaign funds. I never made bigoted statements condemned by my own party. I never dishonored terrorism victims. I never prioritized foreign interests over American duty. I never violated ethics rules. His voice was harsh. I lost 3 elections honestly. You've won multiple elections while enriching your family, making anti-Semitic statements, and using campaign funds improperly. So, who's really the failure here, Congresswoman? Ilhan Omar sat rigid in her chair, her hands gripping the armrests. Her expression cycled through emotions: anger, shock, defensiveness, and something that might have been desperation. This is exactly what they do, she said, her voice shaking slightly. This is exactly what happens to people like me. They dig through everything. They twist everything. They try to destroy us because we speak truth to power. No, Bongino interrupted, his voice like a whip crack. No, Congresswoman, stop. Just stop. He walked closer to her side of the table. You don't get to do that. You don't get to call this twisting or digging. These are your Federal Election Commission filings, your public statements on video, your House voting record, your ethics violations found by Minnesota's board. There's no twisting. There's no digging. This is your public record. Omar tried the race card. This is Islamophobia. These are FEC documents, Bongino said flatly. This is targeting a Muslim woman. Your own Democratic colleagues condemned your anti-Semitism, he countered. This is about silencing criticism of Israel. You compared America to the Taliban, he shot back. As a refugee, as a Muslim woman in Congress, you paid your boyfriend $3 million in campaign funds, Bongino said, his voice hard. Your identity doesn't exempt you from ethics rules. Omar's voice grew desperate. The people attacking me are the same people who... Your own party, Bongino interrupted. Democrats condemned you. Democrats stripped you from your committee. Democrats voted for resolutions rebuking your statements. This isn't Republicans attacking you. This is your own colleagues holding you accountable. He leaned on the table. You came here tonight to destroy me, Congresswoman. You spent 30 minutes calling me racist, Islamophobic, a hate-monger, unpatriotic, a failure. You made it personal. You attacked my character without a shred of evidence. His voice was cold. I responded with documents, facts, your own record. And now you can't handle it. So you're playing the victim. You're crying racism. You're hiding behind your identity. It's what you always do. Omar's voice cracked. I don't have to sit here and be attacked. You started this, Bongino said simply. You called me racist. I showed America your record. If you can't defend it, that's not my problem. That's yours. This is character assassination. This is your public record, Bongino repeated. Every document on this table is public. Every quote is verified. Every scandal is documented. If your record looks bad, maybe you should have a better record. Anderson Hayes finally found his voice. We're going to take a break. No, Bongino said firmly. Let her respond. She came here to attack me. Let her defend herself. Let her explain the $3 million. Let her explain some people did something. Let her explain the anti-Semitism. Let her explain telling Somalis she serves their interests. He looked at Omar. Go ahead, Congresswoman. Explain without calling me racist. Without playing the victim, just Explain your actions." Omar opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked to her staff off stage, but they seemed frozen. She looked at Anderson Hayes, but he was staring at the documents on the table. Finally, she managed, I have fought for my community. I have stood up for refugees, for Muslims, for the marginalized. My record of service." "Your record of corruption," Bongino interjected. "Your record of anti-Semitism. Your record of disrespecting 9/11 victims. Your record of ethics violations. That's your actual record, Congresswoman." He gathered his documents. "And tonight, America saw it. All of it. Not filtered through sympathetic media, not spun by your staff. Just the facts. Your Federal Election Commission filings showing $3 million to your boyfriend. Your own party's condemnation of your anti-Semitism. Your removal from committee. Your ethics violations. Your own words dishonoring 9/11 victims." He looked at the camera. "You can't cry racism your way out of a paper trail, Congresswoman, and tonight, the paper trail buried you." Anderson Hayes looked shell-shocked as he tried to regain control of the broadcast. We're going to take a brief pause," he said, his voice unsteady. "When we return, we'll allow both guests to make closing statements and then take questions from our studio audience." The cameras cut away for a commercial break. In the studio, chaos erupted. Omar's staff rushed to her side, huddling around her in urgent whispered conversation. She looked pale, shaken, her earlier confidence completely shattered. One aide was frantically typing on a phone, presumably trying to manage the social media storm that was undoubtedly erupting. Bongino calmly organized his documents back into his portfolio, his expression neutral. A CNN staffer approached him with a bottle of water, which he accepted with a nod of thanks. In the audience, people were on their phones, texting, tweeting, recording videos. The divide in the room was stark. Some looked triumphant, others angry, many simply stunned. The commercial break felt like it lasted an eternity. When the cameras came back on, Anderson Hayes looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 minutes. "We are back with our America in Dialogue special," he said, sounding anything but dialogic. "We've just witnessed an intense exchange. Congresswoman Omar, you'll have an opportunity for a closing statement." Omar had composed herself somewhat, though her usual confidence was notably absent. "Thank you, Anderson," she said, her voice controlled but tight. "I came here tonight hoping for a substantive policy discussion about immigration, about the refugee experience, about what it means to be Muslim in America." She looked at the camera. "Instead, I was subjected to a coordinated attack designed to silence a Muslim woman in Congress. This is what happens when we speak truth to power. They try to destroy us with selective facts, with distortions, with attacks on our character." Her voice gained some strength. "Every allegation made tonight has been investigated and addressed. The FEC complaint was dismissed. The ethics matters in Minnesota were resolved. My statements about Israel and Palestine have been taken out of context by people who want to silence legitimate criticism of Israeli government policy." She gestured toward Bongino. "This man represents a strain of American politics that sees people like me, refugees, Muslims, women of color, as threats. He has built a career on division, on fear-mongering, on targeting communities that already face discrimination." Her voice rose slightly. "But I will not be silenced. I will not be intimidated. I will continue fighting for refugees, for Muslims, for all marginalized communities. I will continue speaking truth to power, even when powerful forces try to tear me down." She looked directly at the camera. "To every young Muslim watching, to every refugee, to everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. Don't let them silence you. Don't let them make you feel ashamed of who you are. This is what courage looks like. Standing up even when they try to destroy you. It was a practiced response delivered with increasing confidence. But it notably didn't address any specific allegation. Not the $3 million to my net, not the anti-Semitic statements, not the 9/11 comment, not the ethics violations, just a general claim of victimhood and a call to resistance. Anderson Hayes turned to Bongino. "Mr. Bongino, your closing statement." Bongino stood up, leaving his portfolio on the table. He looked directly at the camera, speaking with quiet intensity. "Congresswoman Omar just did exactly what I said she'd do. She claimed victimhood. She accused me of attacking her identity. She said, everything has been investigated and addressed. And she didn't answer a single specific allegation." He held up his hand, ticking off points on his fingers. "She didn't explain why her campaign paid her boyfriend's company $3 million. She didn't explain why those payments started the exact month their affair began. She didn't explain why the same services cost 60% less after she cut ties with him. She just said the FEC complaint was dismissed, without mentioning it was dismissed on a technicality, not because it was ethical. Second finger, she didn't apologize for calling 9/11. Some people did something. She didn't address Nicholas Harros Jr. wearing her quote on a shirt at the memorial. She didn't explain why she couldn't bring herself to condemn the terrorists by name. She just moved on. Third finger, she didn't address her anti-Semitic statements. She said they were taken out of context, but her own Democratic colleagues condemned them. The House voted 407 to 23, specifically because of her comments. She was removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee. Those are facts, not context. Fourth finger, she didn't explain telling a Somali audience that she'd make the U.S. government do what they want, or that she shares their interests. She just ignored it. Fifth finger, she didn't address her Minnesota ethics violations, her tax fraud, her pattern of financial misconduct. She said they were resolved, meaning she paid the penalty after getting caught. He lowered his hand. Instead, she played the victim. She claimed I'm attacking her because she's Muslim. She said, I'm trying to silence her. She accused me of fear-mongering. His voice hardened. I'm not attacking you because you're Muslim, Congresswoman. I'm holding you accountable because you're a politician with a record. And that record is troubling. He walked toward the camera. You're right about one thing. You chose to come to America. My ancestors came here too, seeking opportunity, freedom, a better life. But they didn't use their positions for personal gain. They didn't dishonor victims of terrorism. They didn't make bigoted statements condemned by their own communities. They didn't call everyone who questioned them racists. His voice grew passionate. America welcomed you as a refugee. It gave you opportunities beyond what most people could imagine. You became a state legislator. You became a congresswoman. You became a national figure. That's the American dream realized. He leaned forward. But with that position comes responsibility. With that platform comes accountability. And when you pay your boyfriend $3 million in campaign funds, when you make anti-Semitic statements, when you dishonor 9/11 victims, when you prioritize foreign interests, when you violate ethics rules, you don't get to hide behind your identity. You don't get to call accountability Islamophobia. You don't get to play the victim. His voice was firm. I ran for office 3 times and lost 3 times. Yes, I'm a failed politician. The voters rejected me. I accept that. I moved on. I built a business. I created a platform. I did it honestly, without enriching my family, without violating ethics rules, without making bigoted statements. He looked directly at Omar. You've succeeded at getting elected, but you've also succeeded at something far worse. You've shown that some politicians believe their identity exempts them from accountability, that playing the race card can deflect from any scandal, that calling critics racist can silence legitimate questions. His voice dropped. Tonight, that didn't work. Tonight, your record caught up with you. Tonight, America saw that accusations of racism don't beat documented evidence, that crying victimhood doesn't explain $3 million to your boyfriend, that identity politics don't erase anti-Semitism condemned by your own party. He turned back to the camera. This isn't about Islam. This isn't about refugees. This isn't about race or gender. This is about a member of Congress who has repeatedly shown poor judgment, ethical lapses, and a pattern of using identity as a shield against accountability. His final words were measured and firm. Congresswoman Omar, you came here tonight to destroy my reputation. You called me everything but a child of God. You attacked my character without evidence. I responded with your public record, and that record speaks for itself. He paused. The American people can decide who they believe. The video went viral within minutes. By the time the program ended at 11 p.m. Eastern, clips were already flooding social media. By midnight, Bongino Omar was trending #1 on Twitter. By morning, it had been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms. Conservative outlets led with headlines like, "Destroyed, Bongino systematically dismantles Omar with facts." The night Ilhan Omar's race card didn't work. Omar calls Bongino racist. He responds with her FEC filings. Mainstream media tried for balance. Heated CNN debate between Bongino and Omar goes viral. Omar defends record against conservative attacks. Contentious exchange highlights deep political divisions. Progressive media attempted damage control. Islamophobic ambush. Right-wing talking points used against Omar. Muslim congresswoman attacked on national TV. But even they couldn't dispute the actual facts. The FEC filings were real. The House votes were real. The Minnesota findings were real. The quotes were on video. Omar's office released a statement the next morning. Last night's program was a coordinated attack designed to silence Congresswoman Omar's voice. The allegations presented have all been previously investigated and addressed. Reporter Omar has been the subject of ongoing harassment and Islamophobic attacks since taking office. She will not be deterred from her mission to serve her constituents and fight for justice. The statement didn't mention the $3 million to Minette. It didn't address the anti-Semitic statements. It didn't explain some people did something. It didn't clarify the Somalia speech. It just claimed victimhood and moved on. But social media wasn't moving on. The Minette payment timeline went viral, showing the exact correlation between the affair starting and the travel expenses beginning. Clips of her "some people did something" statement were shared millions of times along with Nicholas Harros Jr.'s response. The video of the House voting to remove her from the Foreign Affairs Committee circulated widely. Political operatives from both parties took notice. Republicans immediately announced they'd be using clips from the debate in campaign ads. Democrats privately groaned, knowing this would make Omar a liability in swing districts. Most devastatingly, some of Omar's progressive allies began quietly distancing themselves. When asked about the debate, they gave carefully worded non-answers. "I haven't seen the full context. I'd need to review the specific claims. This seems like a distraction from important issues." Translation: they couldn't defend her record either. Dan Bongino addressed it on his podcast the next day, his voice tired but satisfied. Look, I didn't go on CNN to destroy Ilhan Omar. I went to discuss immigration policy and American identity. She made the decision to make it personal. She spent 30 minutes calling me racist, Islamophobic, a hate-monger, a failure. He paused. So, I responded with her public record. That's it. I didn't make anything up. I didn't take anything out of context. I cited Federal Election Commission filings, House votes, Minnesota state findings, court documents, and her own public statements. Everything I said can be verified in about 5 minutes on Google. His voice grew more intense. And she couldn't handle it. She couldn't defend paying her boyfriend $3 million. She couldn't defend her anti-Semitic statements that her own party condemned. She couldn't defend dishonoring 9/11 victims. So she did what she always does. She played the victim. She called it Islamophobia. She claimed she was being silenced. He laughed without humor. Congresswoman, you're not being silenced. You're on every cable news network. You're in every newspaper. You have 3 million Twitter followers. You're one of the most famous members of Congress. You're not being silenced. You're being held accountable. There's a difference. He leaned toward the microphone. And here's what I want my listeners to understand. This is the playbook. When caught in scandal, politicians like Omar immediately cry racism, sexism, Islamophobia, whatever identity shield is available. They can't defend their actions, so they attack their critics' motives. They make it about who they are, rather than what they've done. His voice hardened. But here's the thing. Americans are tired of it. They're tired of being called bigots for asking legitimate questions. They're tired of identity politics being used to deflect from corruption. They're tired of the race card being played to avoid accountability. He paused. Last night, I think we saw a turning point, because I didn't back down. I didn't apologize. I didn't let her accusations intimidate me. I just kept citing facts, documented, verifiable, undeniable facts, and she had no answer. He concluded simply, "You can't cry racism your way out of a paper trail, and the paper trail on Ilhan Omar is damning." Within weeks, there were real political consequences. A credible primary challenger announced a campaign against Omar in Minnesota's 5th District, citing the need for ethical representation. The FEC reopened questions about the Minette payments based on renewed public pressure. The House Ethics Committee, which had largely ignored her, suddenly found itself under pressure to investigate. Omar's favorability ratings, which had been underwater in national polls but strong in her district, began to slip even at home. Town halls became more contentious, with constituents asking pointed questions about campaign finance and ethics. She doubled down on her messaging, framing every criticism as racism or Islamophobia. But the old shield wasn't working as well anymore. Too many people had seen the debate. Too many people had looked up the facts themselves. Too many people had watched her fail to defend her record. The debate became a case study in political discourse classes. It was analyzed by campaign strategists. It was used as an example in journalism ethics courses, both for how to prepare documentation and for how not to rely on personal attacks. But more than anything, it became a cultural moment, a turning point, a demonstration that facts, properly marshaled and calmly presented, could still cut through identity politics. One independent voter in Minnesota, interviewed by a local TV station, summed it up best. "I've always supported Congresswoman Omar. I liked her story, her background, what she represented. But after that debate, I looked up those FEC filings myself. I read the House resolutions. I watched the video of her 9/11 comment, and I realized maybe I've been giving her a pass because of who she is, rather than holding her accountable for what she's done. He paused, looking uncomfortable. That doesn't make me racist. That makes me a voter demanding better from my representatives. In a television studio in New York, the lights were dimming for the final time that night. The audience had filed out. The cameras were powered down, the stage was being reset for the next day's programming. But the documents Dan Bongino had laid out remained on the debate table, organized in neat piles. FEC filings showing $3 million to a boyfriend's company. House resolutions condemning anti-Semitic statements. Minnesota ethics violations. Divorce filings. News reports. Vote tallies. A paper trail that told a story more damning than any accusation. Anderson Hayes stood alone on the stage, looking at those documents. He'd been in journalism for 30 years. He'd seen countless debates, thousands of interviews, decades of political theater, but he'd never seen anything quite like what had happened tonight. One politician had tried to destroy another with personal attacks and accusations of bigotry. The other had simply let the public record speak for itself. And in the battle between accusations and evidence had won. Hayes picked up one of the FEC filings, reading through it again. $3 million to a boyfriend's company during an affair, with payments starting the exact month the relationship began. He set it down and walked off the stage. Some stories didn't need spin. Some facts didn't need interpretation. Sometimes the truth was just the truth.